Welcome to the Friends with Money podcast, brought to you by Money Magazine, creating financial freedom for Australians since 1999.
Hello and welcome to the Friends with Money podcast. My name is Michelle Baltazar. I'm the editor-in-chief here at Money Magazine. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to talk about a topic that's been on my mind in recent months, and that is the worrying rise of online scams. According to the latest Scamwatch report by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, or ACCC, more than 239,000 scams were reported last year. That's just way too much. And as a nation, we've lost a record $3.1 billion in 2022 alone. Now, that's a lot of savings that have just vanished into thin air. To help us find out more about scams and how to avoid them, we are pleased to be joined today by Catriona Lowe, the Deputy Commissioner of the ACCC. Catriona, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure, Michelle. This is a really important topic.
Absolutely. I mean, it feels like it's just exploded overnight, but it's definitely front and center. As Money Magazine, we're writing so many news articles now about people getting scammed. But tell us, what are the most popular scams at the moment? What's been really high on your priority list?
As you've noted, Michelle, Australians lost a record $3.1 billion to scams in 2022, and that's an 80% increase on the previous year. And we are unfortunately seeing that scammers are not only increasing, they are getting increasingly sophisticated. So one of the most common scams reported last year was what's called phishing scams, where essentially the scammer goes fishing to try and either get pieces of your personal information or your money. And we had almost 75,000 reports of phishing scams in 2022 and losses of nearly $25 million to those scams. And that's a 469% increase in those sorts of scams.
That is so scary. I almost feel like on an average day, someone is getting scammed out there or getting hit by a con, if you like. Is that fair to say that?
Well, scamming is a numbers game. We don't know, of course, how many attempts are being made because, as I say, it's a numbers game. They might try 100,000 times, and if they get one and clean out someone's bank account, then that's unfortunately a good day's work for the scammer. One of the examples of phishing scams that we're particularly concerned about at the moment is what's called a bank impersonation scam. And scammers are able to now use technology such that they can insert a text message into the feed of genuine text messages from a legitimate organisation. They might be able to spoof the phone numbers of financial institutions and do a really convincing job of pretending to be calling from the bank's fraud department and alleging that they're seeking to protect your money. But there's one really important thing for people to remember if they do get one of those calls. Your bank will never ask you to move money to protect it. They will never do that. If you are being asked to move money to protect it, that is a big red flag that it's a scam call.
Absolutely. You almost need to pause when you get those kind of calls or messages to say, does that make sense? Will Commonwealth Bank really call me to personally tell me to transfer my funds? But it's a shame, but a lot of people get caught out by that.
That's a really important point that you make, Michelle. We ask people to remember 3 key words in relation to protecting themselves from scams, and those words are stop, think, protect. So stop. Before you give money, before you click on the link, before you give personal information, think, do I really know who I'm dealing with? Is there another way that I can verify this? So, for example, if you think maybe a text is legitimate, you can go onto the internet and independently search for the contact information of that institution and call them that way to check. And finally, protect. If you do think you may have fallen victim to a scam, call your bank as soon as possible. The more quickly they know, the more chance there is that they'll be able to stop the funds leaving your bank account, or may be able to trace where the funds are going to. And of course, protect also means report the matter to Scamwatch, because that will help warn others about the scams that are out there.
So let's talk about that. So they can report it to Scamwatch, and it's so good that the ACCC is out there talking about this and calling on the government, the corporates, the community to really band together to fight against these faceless criminals, if you like, because we really don't know where the scam's coming from. But what does the ACCC do once a scam's reported?
So Scamwatch enables people to report scams that they may have fallen victim to, but also scams that they may have seen. And we really encourage people to do that, because, of course, the more data that we have about scams, the more we're able to share that data across the network of actors and have the best chance of disrupting the scams. You can make a report anonymously, so you don't have to necessarily provide your details. But we do really encourage people to make that report. We know that up to 30% of people don't report scams at all, even when they have made losses, because we know that people can feel embarrassed about falling victim to a scam. But the reality is these people are serious criminals who are very, very good at exploiting consumer behaviour. And that's why we're very pleased to see also some commitments recently from the government in the federal budget, which provides us and other regulatory agencies with funds to help combat this problem. And in our case, that includes setting up a national anti-scam centre, which will bring together expertise and resources to disrupt scams and raise consumer awareness about how to avoid them, as well as linking victims with services where they may have lost money or had their identity compromised.
My goodness, that is an exciting development to have that. So that is called a National Anti-Scam Center. Now, I know that that was announced during the budget announcement, but tell us more about that. But before that, you mentioned about people, how do they get their money back? I mean, this is a tricky one, isn't it? So how can people get their money back?
Unfortunately, very often, once the money is gone, it's gone. Scammers will typically move quickly from potentially legitimate accounts to less legitimate accounts and offshore. And that's why speed of reporting to your bank is important, because that does give the best chance of finding out where the money went and potentially blocking some of those accounts. Sometimes scammers will try and get people to pay by alternative methods such as cryptocurrency or gift cards, and banks aren't able to assist where payment is made through those sorts of channels. So we do strongly advise not to make payments through those channels. That is indeed another flag that you're dealing with a scammer if they're asking for payment in gift cards or cryptocurrency. But we do know that victims are unlikely to get their money back. So ASIC, another important actor in this ecosystem of helping with scams, recently released a report which found that bank customers wore 96% of the scam losses, which is to say only 2 to 5% of scam victims were refunded the losses by their bank. That was a report looking at the big four banks. And that really underlines the importance of a few things. Firstly, stopping the scams getting to people in the first place. So that's particularly important for telcos and platforms, because we know those are the main contact points, but also for financial institutions to be investing in tools that help consumers spot scams, but also to spot unusual activity in bank accounts and raise flags to stop people losing this money. Because you're right, people are in some cases losing their life savings.
I read an article just recently about a woman who lost $260,000 of her savings because she thought she was investing it in a legitimate bank deposit. So it's quite sad, definitely, when people lose their retirement savings because of a scam.
Yes, and investment scams do remain the highest cause of losses. They're not the highest reported scams, but when people do fall victim to them, that's where we are seeing the highest losses. The bank impersonation scams that I mentioned are also very troubling because we are seeing people having their entire accounts cleaned out through these scams.
That's just horrific. Now, if you're listening to this podcast and if you've been scammed but you haven't reported it, there's absolutely no shame. It's not your fault. I mean, these con artists are out there to get people, and that is why the ACCC has the Scamwatch. So you just Google it. Catriona, I've done it for a friend of mine. I've reported it through your Scamwatch report, and it took me a couple of minutes to just give the details, and that would help more people just kind of be alert to any new scams, because they keep changing, don't they? They keep kind of trying to be a step ahead. Once you know about one type of scam, there's a new one that comes in.
That's exactly right. Sometimes we refer to it as squeezing the python. You squeeze down on one channel and it pops up somewhere else. But it is at least reassuring that when we're working together, we are able to shut down some mechanisms or types of scams. But you are right, scammers unfortunately are incredibly innovative and they are incredibly good at exploiting human nature in often cases really lovely aspects of human nature. So the desire to find love or to help disaster victims or to make a better life for your family through an investment. So these are all natural things for people to feel, and scammers are very good at exploiting it. They're also very good at getting us into what's called a hot state, so where we might be rushing or not thinking as clearly as we might be when we're in a calm, usual state. So that's why often we see there's a sense of urgency around these scams and a sense of urgency of needing to act, because that overrides some of our usual decision-making processes and our usual filters and triggers for things that might not be quite right.
So once again, Catriona, what are the 3 steps?
So the 3 things we ask consumers to remember, or the 3 words I should say, are stop, think, protect. So stop before you click on a link, before you give money or information. Just pause. Then think, do I really know who I'm dealing with? Are there features of this that are perhaps a little bit not quite right? And finally, protect. If you do fear that you've fallen victim to a scam, contact your bank as soon as you can and report the matter to Scamwatch.
Well said. Once again, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today, Catriona.
It's my great pleasure, Michelle. It's, as I say, a very, very important topic for people to be aware of.
Agree. Now, before we go, don't forget that if you find our podcasts useful for you when you're trying to save money or protect your savings, please listen to the Friends with Money podcast, and we'd love for you to recommend it to your own friends and family, or you can help us out by leaving a review on iTunes or the Apple Podcast app. You can also send in any questions, comments, or even topics you'd love us to cover through our dedicated email, which is podcast@moneymag.com.au. Email us if there's anything you want to know more about the investment scams or anything you want us to ask Catriona Lowe in future news articles. And finally, make sure you head over to moneymag.com.au for all the latest financial news and stories. That's it for this episode. I'm Michelle Baltazar. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Friends with Money podcast. For credible, independent, and easy to understand financial commentary, visit moneymag.com.au. Please remember that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are general in nature, and further independent advice and research based on your personal circumstances should be sought before making an investment decision.